This is a production of SECA in association with the South Carolina ETV Network. Funding for this Firing Line special debate is provided by the John M. Olin Foundation, the Laurel Foundation, L. John Polite, Jr., the Carolina Piedmont Foundation, the University of South Carolina at Spartanburg, and the Friends of Firing Line.
Good evening. Welcome to a special Firing Line debate from Spartanburg, South Carolina, campus of the University of South Carolina at Spartanburg. Our topic is the war. No, not that war, the war before that one, the drug war. You remember the drug war. It was just 18 months ago that President Bush made his first national primetime television speech. He held up a bag of crack obtained in Lafayette Park, just a few yards from the White House. Now, this happens to be a bag of sugar obtained in my own kitchen just a few short miles from the White House, but the principle is the same. Mr. Bush said that drugs were America's toughest domestic challenge, and Americans agreed. 70% said drugs were indeed one of the most important issues facing the country. But today, President Bush doesn't talk much about drugs anymore. His first drug czar, William Bennett, has wandered off, and so has the attention of most Americans. Even last summer, before Saddam Hussein forcibly changed the subject, only 25% of Americans were saying in polls that drugs were one of the most important problems facing the nation. You're probably thinking right now, drugs? I wonder what's on Larry King. Well, shame on you. Don't touch that remote control. But why the quick loss of interest? There are three logical possibilities. First possibility, the crisis is over. Mr. Bush won the drug war the same way he won that other war in the Middle East. Nah. Second possibility, the crisis remains, but nobody cares anymore. Cynical politicians and media have milked it and dropped it. The public's attention span is notoriously short. Third possibility, the crisis was exaggerated all along. You'll hear statistics tonight to back up all three possibilities, and you can make up your own minds. But unlike that other war, the drug war goes on. Some Americans, including William F. Buckley, Jr., believe this war is more a quagmire like Vietnam than a blitzkrieg like Kuwait. And they advocate applying Senator George Aiken's famous advice about the Vietnam quagmire: just declare victory and come home. Thus tonight's debate question: resolved, drug prohibition has failed. I'm the moderator, Mike Kinsley of the New Republic magazine. Now let's welcome our debaters. The captain of the affirmative team is William F. Buckley, Jr., founder and host of Firing Line, founder and, new title, editor-at-large of the National Review. The thought of Mr. Buckley being at large will terrify a lot of people. In his latest nonfiction book called Gratitude, Mr. Buckley advocates a year of national service for all young people. Our college audience here in Spartanburg might not warm to that idea, but just think, if Mr. Buckley has his way, at least you can spend that entire year stoned. Ira Glasser is executive director of the dread American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU is dedicated to protecting individual rights. It loves rights. It can find violations of rights you didn't even know you had. As it happens, I just got my ACLU card in the mail the other day. I paid my dues, Ira. And I thought it might be interesting to try and burn it here in this crowded theater just to see if Ira Glasser would step in and defend my right to do so. But unfortunately, it's made out of plastic, so that idea is out. Dr. Kildare Clarke, and we won't burden him with any jokes about his name, is director of primary care at Kings County Hospital Center in New York. He's a psychiatrist with a law degree and a master's degree in industrial labor relations. He's also a consultant for the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And rounding out the affirmative side is Richard Dennis. And I do have a small joke to make about Richard Dennis's name. He may not know it. Some people like to refer to him as Rich Dentist. But that's neither here nor there. Mr. Dennis is a successful commodities trader who has branched out into ideological entrepreneurship. He is president of New Perspectives Quarterly and sits on the boards of the Cato Institute, the well-known libertarian group, as well as the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations and People for the American Way. So that's the affirmative team. In the opposition, the negative team, as Mr. Buckley likes to call it whenever he's on the other side, the chairman of the opposition team is Representative Charles Rangel, Democrat of New York, chairman of the House Select Committee on Narcotics and a senior member of Ways and Means. Mr. Rangel is also a former federal prosecutor. Like other prominent New York politicians, such as Ed Koch, Mr. Rangel is known for his enormous reserve, really shyness, I think you would call it, and his soft, demure style of address. So in the course of the evening, we may have to ask him to speak up. The Reverend Jerry Falwell, I believe, can take credit for the founding of People for the American Way, of which Richard Dennis is on the board. People For was founded more or less specifically to make life miserable for Mr. Falwell and his organization, the Moral Majority. The Moral Majority no longer exists, but Liberty University and the Thomas Road Baptist Church, which Mr. Falwell also founded, are thriving in Lynchburg, Virginia. Lois Herrington served as chairman of the White House Conference for a Drug-Free America during the entire Reagan administration. An attorney, she has also served as chairman of the President's Task Force on Victims of Crime and chairman of the National Crime Prevention Coalition. And finally, just to make sure that the opposition team is not without psychiatric care, Dr. Harold Voth. Dr. Voth spent 25 years with the Menninger Clinic. He's a retired Rear Admiral who helped to design the Navy's apparently quite successful anti-drug program. He now practices psychiatry in Topeka and teaches at the University of Kansas. So those are the debaters, and I now call upon Mr. Buckley to propose the motion.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, as a sometime South Carolinian, I both thank you for your hospitality and take it for granted. Hospitality being the Southern mode, I know that it will tax you to listen patiently to the arguments of my friends Lois Herrington and Jerry Falwell, whom I so much admire, and to Congressman Charles Rangel, who so cheerfully exploits the immunities of invincible ignorance. They are, along with Dr. Voth, men and women of high motives who are mistaken in supposing that our national policy on how to cope with the drug problem is enlightened. My colleagues and I join in opposing it for reasons which I hope our adversaries will not permit themselves to translate into a putative indifference to the curse of drugs, but to know the pathology of cocaine and heroin and marijuana, or for that matter, to know the implications of the abuse of alcohol and tobacco, is very different from any knowledge of how effectively to control disoriented human appetites. I don't doubt that the Reverend Mr. Falwell would acknowledge that the Reverend Jimmy Swaggart knows the differences between cupidity and self-containment, between chastity and concupiscence, which tells us only that knowledge is not always wisdom. Perhaps we should not tolerate free enterprise on the grounds that there are those who will abuse the acquisitive drive, or perhaps we should not tolerate alcohol because 200,000 Americans die every year from abusing it. I think I speak for my colleagues when I say that if one act of Congress could generate the disappearance of psychoactive drugs from the face of the earth, as surely as an act of Congress can generate inflation or a public deficit, we'd urge Congress to enact such legislation so that cocaine and heroin and marijuana would disappear from the face of the earth, even as smallpox has done. But it isn't happening. Our war on drugs isn't working, and wouldn't work even if General Schwarzkopf were placed in charge of it. Though, come to think of it, I don't know if he ordered the carpet bombing of Peru and Colombia, Thailand, Burma, Vietnam, the Philippines, Pakistan, Iran, and Tunisia. The supply of these poisons would, I suppose, diminish for a while, but we are here to propose that we focus on the costs we are paying for going from what we abhor into what we want to send people to jail for doing. It isn't working. It is draining the resources of our police and judiciary. It is costing us every year more than Operation Desert Storm, and the time has come to say, let's grow up. Let's do what we can for those who are afflicted, short of sending them to jail, And let's not permit ourselves to attempt to transform legislative policy into a form of angelism. I'm entirely sincere when I say that I would trade every drug law on the books, if I had only the one alternative, in favor of taking the 800,000 people we arrest every year and handcuffing them to the pews of their local churches and making them listen to Jerry Falwell for an hour. So listen keenly, if you will, and remember that the politics of conservatism begins with the recognition of reality. Mr. Chairman, bring on the snake oil salesman of laws and more laws and more laws, which are a poor substitute for the Ten Commandments and as unenforceable.
Thank you. Would the chief snake oil salesman of the opposition like to ascend the podium?
Mr. Chairman, it's indeed a great honor to be at the University of South Carolina in Spartanburg. And certainly it's good that we're in a theater where we can afford to laugh and see the frolic of some of the positions that will be taken by what apparently is going to be a great entertaining evening led by Mr. Bill Buckley. Certainly if it was not for entertainment, I don't think any of the people on the opposition would dare believe that the positions they're taking on this very serious question is one that they truly believe in. Amen. America is beginning to feel good about itself. We need that kind of help, too, sometimes. And I think the excitement of our victory in the Middle East has brought a sense of self-esteem that has been missing in this nation for many years. And now is the time for our great nation, our great republic, to start seeing whether or not we can regain some of the leadership that we've had in commerce and in trade. You can't do this unless you have a competent, dedicated, educated, trained, drug-free workforce. And God knows when you refer to the general that was there, and as well as Colin Powell, it seems to me that that is what we're missing now, to find a take-charge general like Schwarzkopf, like Colin Powell, to coordinate some type of strategy so that America, who's never run away from a battle, would not be running away from this battle. If I thought for one moment that you were sincere about this, I would ask you to take a look at the children that are born addicted to drugs, to talk about those that find themselves in the emergency wards, if you will, doctor, with the illnesses that are attributed to this. The time is now not to find a silver bullet or one answer, but to find a coordinated policy where we can educate, where we can attempt to prevent. Yes, to have law enforcement, but to have a sound foreign policy where friend and foe alike would recognize that this country does not do business with drug dealers. If you were to have your way, I can see Noriega being a consultant for some international trade policy that would be legal. Certainly I can see that you would have doctors opening up clinics and hospitals would be dispensing drugs. May would be in the chain stores. Perhaps we would have dispensing machines. Would you ever have an age that you would limit the drugs being given to? And if you did, would you give them the same protection that you failed to give the tens of thousands of teenage alcoholics that we have today, or the kids that are smoking and ruining their health? It seems to me that when you talk about legalization, you should be prepared to answer those questions. And certainly you know that drug addicts just don't do it because it's the casual and the things that you do at cocktail parties. Normally they want to get high. Would you cut off their dosage? Would they not go to the illicit market to get a dosage? Or do you care? Would they OD? Or would you allow them to have a medical examination? Would you give them the drugs? Would you sell them the drugs? And certainly if they didn't have money, would you have a federal giveaway program with drug stamps to administer in order to give it to them? I suggest to you that if you say take the profit out of drugs by making it legal, you're not talking about our doctors, you're not talking about our pharmaceutical companies, and if you have American know-how, I soon suspect that our American farmers will be looking to subsidize the growth of coca leaf and opium right in our country. No, let's win this war against drugs the same way we won it in the Middle East.
Ira Glasser.
Well, those were some interesting questions, Charlie, but you didn't answer the one that we're here to talk about. It's whether drug prohibition, your favorite policy, has failed. We have spent 20 times more in this year on drug law enforcement than we spent in the late 60s when the war on drugs began. And despite all that money, despite all that growth, everyone now agrees that there is no way, even Ronald Reagan agrees, all the government studies show that there is no way to keep drugs from entering this country. So what we're doing with the criminal law now is punishing the user. That's fine. Illegal drug use is down, but no more so than alcohol use or cigarette use. And we did that without prohibition. Meanwhile, consider the harm caused by prohibition. Murder rates are soaring in all of our cities. Murder rates, which went down steeply after alcohol prohibition ended, began to climb steeply when the war on drugs began. And innocent bystanders are being killed in epidemic proportions. Children are dying, some in their cribs because they're getting in the way of stray bullets. Those people are dying, and they're dying today. Disease is spreading. Disease is spreading because in Liverpool, England, where clean needles are available, less than 1% of drug addicts carry the AIDS virus. In New York City, where you and I live, 60%. Meanwhile, we're enriching criminals beyond belief. Drug prohibition is a government price support system for criminal organizations. That's the legacy of drug prohibition. Disease and death for innocent people and untold riches for criminals. Enough is enough.
Don't leave.
I'm not leaving.
Does someone have a question for Ira Glasser, or has he persuaded you all?
Ira, you don't have any doubt in your mind that by having easier access to drugs that you increase the number of people that would become addicted to drugs. But what concerns me with your sense of freedom for all is the child that is born addicted to drugs. In every major city throughout these United States, we find more and more children addicted because the parents had access. This number would increase. Do you support this type of thing?
Charlie, 100 times as many children are born damaged from alcohol and cigarettes. And I don't see you getting up on the floor of Congress talking about prohibition, talking about shooting people, talking about flying in guns, talking about winning wars on alcohol and cigarettes the way we won in the Gulf. Come off it. People are going to jail and dying because of those policies, and the drug problem isn't getting any better.
So what you're saying is because we have failed so miserably in controlling alcohol abuse that we should just throw up our hands and quit and allow cocaine and crack abuse.
What I'm saying is that people are not getting shot in the streets. Al Capone didn't kill people because he was drunk.
The babies haven't shot anybody.
Lois
No, they're
Herrington.
getting shot.
Lois Herrington, do you have a question?
Who should I interrupt?
Everyone you can.
All right, now I know the rules. Mr. Glasser, in this last big health push we've had since 1985 to 1988, we've kind of gotten a little success with alcohol and cigarettes, 5 to 6% reduction on the legal drugs. We have had a 35% reduction in marijuana and a 50-cent reduction in cocaine use. Now, are you still going to use that as an example?
Yeah, because your statistics aren't right. The fact is that the biggest single drop in drug use is the drop in cigarettes from 1965 on. It's dropped from 43% of adults who are smoking a pack or more a day to about 26%. If you look at the drug use from 65 to 90, and any other drug, no drop is as dramatic. And we did it without laws that prohibit it. We did it without shootings in the street. We did it without putting 1 million people in jail. We did it without arresting 1.2 million people every year. What is the point of it?
We are not reducing the cigarettes with our youth. It is the same. It has not gone down.
Are you in favor of cigarette prohibition, if you think that's such a wonderful policy?
No, I'm just telling you that's not a very good example.
Dr. Voth.
I believe you and your organization favor individual liberty, don't you? Freedom of choice.
It's true.
That's right.
I confess.
Now let me ask you something. Does illness increase or decrease a person's freedom?
Does illness increase?
Illness.
What
Any kind of illness. Mental illness, physical illness, you name it. Is a person who is sick more free or less free?
I don't think a person who is sick is more or less free against the government.
No, I'm not talking about the government.
Yeah, but that's what freedom means.
No, I'm talking about freedom to make decisions, to do things, to go out into the world, to
Well, whose
whatever.
illness are you talking about?
No, I'm not. Wait a minute.
60% of the people in New
Just
York
answer
have
the
AIDS
question.
because
I'm
of
asking the
unclean
question.
needles.
Is a sick person freer or less free than a healthy
To
person?
do what, Dr.
Anything. To do anything.
I don't know what that question means. What we are trying to figure
I'm
out
trying to
is
point
whether or
out-
not prohibition
I know
works.
what it means. I think you ought to answer it.
Well, why don't you tell me what it means?
He's ducking the question.
Yeah, I think you are ducking the question.
He's ducking the question.
Well, why don't you
the
be so
answer,
kind
the
and tell me
answer
what
that
it means?
listen, I'll give you the answer.
You
The
tell me
answer
what it
is that
means.
sickness decreases a person's freedom
Now,
to do
how did I
anything.
know you were going to say that?
Okay, now, drugs decrease a person's freedom. So what you're really doing is you're being two-faced because you're advocating out of one side of your mouth freedom, liberty, and all of those wonderful words. On the other hand, you're advocating people have free access to drugs when in fact taking drugs diminishes human
Dr.
freedom.
Toth, there is nobody in the ghettos of this country who hasn't got easy access to drugs.
That's right.
The problem is that they have it under illegal conditions where they're dying from death and they're getting shot getting it, and they're getting imprisoned because of it.
Well,
That's what's
you've ducked my
interfering with their
question.
freedom.
You've always ducked
And you
these
have
questions.
ducked the question, which is, has drug prohibition failed, or is it causing more harm than good?
No, you
Answer
ducked
that
the question. I said, do drugs increase personal freedom or decrease it?
Well, you answered
obviously
that
they
question.
decrease
Now
it.
answer mine.
There's another one here.
Someone else have a question for Reverend Falwell? He's persuaded you, huh?
Not yet.
Well, let me ask this, that if you say that prohibition's failed, and I'm inclined to agree with you, do you really think that we've had a war against drugs? I mean, do you just give up and run? It wasn't really the Army that won in the Persian Gulf. It wasn't the Navy. It wasn't the Air Force. It wasn't the Marines. It was everyone working
you
together.
and I have been arguing about this for years,
I'm
and you always
asking,
say
do
we
you
haven't
really
tried.
Have you ever heard anything being done on a national level in education?
Yes.
What?
I'm not
Name a
talking about
statement
education.
that's
We're
been
talking
made.
about
We're
whether
talking
drug prohibition is working.
But we're talking
all
about-
for education, but how do you get money to spend it when you're using it all for law enforcement?
Oh, so what you're saying is that since law enforcement is not working, then we should give up on that and just give it out and dispense
Give it to education.
That's absolutely
You are
ridiculous.
spending $10.5 billion on drugs and only 30% on treatment and education. Reverse those percentages. You're in Congress.
Why can't
Reverse
we
it.
put the money in education, put it in
Of course,
treatment,
you keep
and still
voting
have
for
it
the
in
bills that put it into law
You see that?
Okay, thanks. I'm sure we're going to come back to this dialogue. Dr. Voth. Make sure you answer people's questions now.
I did.
Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a high privilege to be here. I, of course, believe very vehemently and very strongly that prohibition is one of the key factors in controlling this terrible epidemic that's sweeping through our country. The concept is fine. The problem is we've not really made it truly operational. We have not really declared a war on drugs. We've used the word war on drugs, but we have not used the techniques of war. And if we really did that, I think we could win it, and we would make an enormous contribution to the winning of this terrible epidemic that's sweeping through the nation. Other nations that have liberalized the use of drugs have reversed themselves. China once had a free access to opium. I think about 25 million Chinese got hooked on opium. It took them 50 years to solve that problem, but they did it, and they did it through very strict prohibitive techniques. Japan, Sweden, Spain, and I understand more recently even Italy tried liberalizing the use of marijuana, and they quickly reversed themselves because the use went up. I was part of the Navy, the design of the Navy program. In the late 70s, 47% of our sailors and Marines, first 5 enlisted grades, were using drugs. Within 1 year, that was it was reduced over 50%. Within a year and a half, it was down to 10%, and I understand now it's down around 5% or below. Prohibition does work if you work at it consistently and effectively.
Don't leave. Don't leave. Does someone have a question for Dr. Voth? Mr.
Yes.
Buckley.
Dr. Voth, I'm very interested in your exploration of libertarian philosophy.
Yeah.
If I understand you correctly, you are saying that given that people have the capacity to incapacitate themselves,
Yes.
they ought not to be free to do so.
I agree with that. They should not.
Therefore, we certainly should have prohibition back and a ban on tobacco. It would
Well,
follow.
ideally, I think it's terrible that people smoke. I've seen terrible diseases result from alcohol and
Well,
tobacco.
no, yeah, we know that.
Yeah, but that's part of the social...
Therefore, we should have such laws, right? Now, you do agree that as we grow older, we become physically less nimble.
Correct.
Does that mean we should have a law against aging?
Oh, what an absurd question, Mr.
Well,
Buckley. Of course
you
not.
see, but I'm trying to ask a question that's parallel to yours asked of Mr. Glasser.
No.
Which is that if in a free society, people, among other things, can say dumb things, he'll protect you. But to say that
Well, I hope he won't
to say that
protect
you're free to say
my-
dumb things doesn't mean that we ought to applaud dumb things getting said, does it? Now, none of us here applauds people who take cocaine or heroin or marijuana. We deplore it, but we're asking whether the consequences of laws prohibiting to do so aren't more insidious given the results.
How about
than the
letting him
program you
answer one of
propose.
these questions now?
Well, back to your original point. I think that, listen, all my life, I've tried to help people maximize their individuality, their capacity to make good decisions, to live their lives productively. And I'm telling you, drugs remove that, diminish that. So I don't understand why this gentleman wants to support a phenomenon that takes away human liberty, human freedom.
Rich Dennis.
Yes.
I want to ask you about another statement you made. You said we haven't really declared war on
No, we
drugs
haven't.
yet. About half of all the new prisoners going into state prisons are drug violators. One state, California, has more prisoners now than the whole country of Great Britain and Italy combined. Is the idea to make 100% of the prisoners drug prisoners?
No.
When will you be satisfied that we've declared war on drugs?
Well, when we seek out the biggies, the kingpins, and really do something about them. Personally, I favor the death penalty for those people. I think those are some of the most vicious people.
How many people
on
have to be in jail who aren't kingpins before that happens?
Well, give them one chance in jail, and if they're out and repeat the crimes, that's the end of it for them. I tell you, we have not gotten tough.
So you
in
think-
Singapore,
you're
there's a
telling
big
me
sign in the airport says
there's a
drug
million-
dealers will be executed.
If there's 500,000 people now in jail for drug violations and they come out and they repeat the same violation, they should be executed.
Depends on the amount of the violation. If it's a small pusher, of course not, or a young kid,
You
of
cut a
course
hand
not.
off or something?
Yes, but if they're a big pusher, personally, I favor the death penalty. Absolutely. I have seen such terrible damage done by the use of drugs and the pushers.
But have you seen the damage done by the use of the criminal justice system on people?
Well, I'm sure there's injustice with the criminal justice system.
No, I said the damage. Does that count for nothing?
Yeah, but we're talking about the damage of drugs. You're not talking about the damage of the criminal justice system. What would you do? Leave them all run free?
That'd be a horrible idea for a country, wouldn't it?
Dr. Clarke.
Dr. Voth, you're a physician like myself, and Valium is a drug, so is Nembutal or any of the drugs
lots
you
of
think
these
about.
prescribed medications.
The cartel members are distributing cocaine.
Right.
They're drug dealers. Would you consider yourself and myself drug dealers?
Not at all.
Why not?
Because there's a reason that prescriptions are given.
Oh, no, you're not concerned because it's legitimate. The government has legitimized how we're prescribing drugs. That's why we are not drug dealers. Is
Yes,
that correct?
But we're taking responsibility for people's illnesses, and we
These
give
people are
drugs
taking responsibilities.
for what?
It's just that you and myself do not agree with their responsibilities.
What
They
kind
are
of, what
taking
kind of responsibility are they taking for the welfare of others when they push drugs?
They are
I mean,
not.
that's an absurd
They
argument.
are not synthetic makers of drugs, are they? They're using natural alkaloids which were grown. They didn't plant them.
But they're distributing them to helpless, vulnerable
Same
people
thing we are doing. We are distributing
for a
drugs.
good purpose. For
Oh.
someone that has a panic reaction and you give a Valium, there's a
That's
legitimate...
what we are talking about. Let's look at
Ira
it from that.
Glasser.
Let me ask you as a doctor whether you would consider making it legal for doctors to prescribe marijuana for medicinal purposes.
No, I would not.
Now, why would you do
Because it
that and
sets a
not Valium?
precedent. Because it sets a bad precedent.
You mean it might help somebody?
No. There are other ways. There are there are other ways to cure glaucoma or take away the anguish
And you
of a
think the
dying
government should
person
be
with...
making that decision?
Pardon?
You think the government, instead of doctors, should be making that decision?
No, I think physicians are making that decision.
Well, they can't make it now because it's a crime.
That's right, because it would
Should
set
they
a-
get the death penalty for prescribing marijuana?
Well, come on, what a ridiculous
Well, what should
question.
happen to them? You want to use the techniques of war. What would you do if a doctor prescribes marijuana?
Well,
Answer.
it depends on what the law is. Right now, it's illegal.
And
So,
what-
well, he's not going to be punished like a big drug pusher. Of course not.
You
Well,
wouldn't
thank goodness
punish
for
them.
that. Thank you, Dr. Voth.
Okay.
Herrington and Mr. Dennis, please ascend the podium. And I guess we'll let Richard Dennis start.
Thank you. About the first thing I learned in politics is if you're losing a debate, to change the subject. I think I learned that from Charlie Rangel. Be that as it may, I suspect at some point tonight the other side will be tired of statistics they can't refute, and we'll hear that the war on drugs is a moral issue. Now, unfortunately, the first principle of a just war is that you do more good, that you don't cause more harm than the good you aim to achieve. And that's a moral question, and it seems to me the war on drugs fails that test miserably. Of course, we can't be fooled. The war on drugs is a moral issue, and it seems to me that that's exactly why the government shouldn't be involved. Last time I checked, the government was greedily collecting taxes from alcohol sales, was lavishly subsidizing tobacco, and it replaced the mob in the numbers game. They call it the state lottery. Actually, the war on drugs poisons the government's attitude in the war on drugs poisons the moral atmosphere on a daily basis. We're egged on to hate the sinner instead of the sin by egregious statements about beheading dealers and executing users. And actually, I think we heard a few more egregious statements here tonight. I think we should remember that salvation, although we have experts on the other side who are more able to talk about salvation than I, is an individual exercise, not a collective one. The idea of government as moralist is both tragic and comic.
Thank you. Lois, take a minute and 30 seconds.
Oh, I give my opening, all right.
Yes.
I was just ready to question you. All right, the proposition tonight assumes that we have had drug prohibition, and we have not. In the 60s and 70s, we stopped building prisons while serious crime rose 400%. We sent out a message that drugs were okay, and our youth stood in line. We glamorized drugs in our words and our music, and lives were lost. The values of a society are measured by the penalty imposed when these values are violated. By that standard, Americans could be judged derelict in their duty to their fellow citizens and even to posterity. For every 100 violent crimes in America, 2 criminals go to prison. The median time served by drug traffickers in state prisons is 14 months. Most Americans believe drug dealers are getting out of prison old and poor. The fact is, most aren't going, and the ones that do are getting out young and rich. Crime pays. Do we then raise the flag of surrender, as some here tonight would do, condemning the many who come after us to lifelong slavery? You know, in the past few years, we've seen a beginning. Education, prevention, treatment, tougher laws, and changes in self-destructive attitudes have begun to work. Drug use is down, and Americans all across the country are beginning to say, not in my home, not in my school, not in my neighborhood, not in my state, and not in my nation. Prohibition can succeed if it's meaningful. Almost every recovering addict and treatment provider will tell you, make it difficult to use. Very difficult to use, because if you don't, the seductiveness of the high will win.
Thank you. Now, I'm afraid you have to contain yourself for a few more minutes while Richard Dennis asks you a few questions.
Do all our values require imprisonment for people when they're violated, or is there anything we can do that you don't approve of, that we could stay out of jail?
Boy, that's pretty big. All I know is we have values that we have in America. And how do we show that we have them? By what way do we show we have these?
How is it a universal value if 60 or 70 million people have used an illegal drug and 20 to 25 million continue to? How is that enough of a universal value to criminalize the behavior?
The value is in the value of the innocent victims of crime and protecting innocent victims of crime. The value in government is protecting its citizenry, and that's what we're doing by these laws. We absolutely have to have these laws to give, you know, you don't want people going out as vigilantes. If somebody's shooting up in your front yard and you're a family and you're a father, what do you do to stop that?
You
need
call
the
the
law
police.
to be, for what? There's no law against it.
There's no law against being on somebody's property.
Say they're shooting right out in your front yard and they're shooting up and the police call and they say, well, what are they doing? You say they're shooting up drugs. Oh, that's too bad. There's no law against that. You say, my children are watching. There's no law against that.
Is there a law against taking your children away from watching?
You're going to hide your family in your house? We have to have laws, and people need them to support the values and beliefs that they have.
What about drug users who just want to use it in the comfort of their own home, then presumably that's okay?
Well, you know, everybody thinks a drug user is kind of a sleepy soul, or going to be kind of writing Jack Kerouac poetry, stream of consciousness, but unfortunately they're not.
Wait,
and
his
I apologize
his
to
drug
Jack Kerouac fan.
His drug was beer,
not.
okay?
They're not, because they're out driving on our highways. They're out.
Is there a law? Do you think will be a law against that under legalization?
I think that people driving under the influence of drugs are very dangerous, and
more dangerous than people under alcohol.
Well, you know, we've had 3 studies on that, and you know which they are: the National Transportation Safety Study, the study at Johns Hopkins and the Trauma Center, and the National Truck Driver Study, and they all show with 50% of the Americans using alcohol and only 10% of the Americans using marijuana, the accident ratio is the same. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that drugs are 5 times more likely to cause accidents. Well, and in the cocaine studies we have, 27% directly attributable to cocaine and fatal accidents in several major
When you
studies.
say directly attributable, how would you know except that it was in their system and they were dead?
Well, I don't know. Is there another way to tell? What do you guess?
Well, there's no way to tell.
It's in their system and they're dead.
Right,
I mean,
but you said
right.
directly attributable. How would you know it's directly attributable?
Well, you know the effect that drugs have on people. You know it affects their judgment and their perception. People can't think clearly under the influence of drugs, and they not only can't think clearly when they're taking drugs, they can't think clearly when they're coming down from drugs.
I'm not sure they can think clearly when they think about legalization of drugs either. I mean, you're talking about things that everyone says will be illegal in any kind of legalization scheme. I mean, everyone understands driving under the influence, whether it's alcohol or a currently illegal drug, if it were legal, would be punishable.
Do you want to triple that amount?
I don't believe it would triple.
My biggest concern in this arena is the innocent victims of crime and protecting as many people as we can.
Are you telling me there would be less crime?
I'm telling you
there would be more
there
crime
would be
if
more
people didn't have
crime.
to steal to get the money to buy drug and feed their habits that cost $200 a day, which would cost $2 a day if it was legal?
You know, in Philadelphia, they had a study on child being beaten to death. 50% were directly attributable to cocaine. I'm talking about abused and neglected children.
The same way that those traffic accidents were attributable?
I'm talking about the problems of innocent victims of crime. I'm talking about the child whose daddy is great except when he's high on cocaine and crawls in bed with her. I'm talking about the woman walking along the street.
Is that illegal or legal?
Crawling in bed with her, that's a crime. That's sexual offenses. 30% of the people in prison today have testified that they were under the influence of drugs at the time of their crime and their sexual offenses, and most of the victims are
children. And how much were under the influence of alcohol?
Combining alcohol and drugs, it comes to about 67%.
So more with alcohol? 67 minus 30?
So does that make it better? So you want to quadruple that?
I want to know if you're a prohibitionist. I want to know if you're. Well, I don't understand the logic there. I mean, you care about the 30% from drugs. You don't care about the 37% from alcohol.
I do.
But
I care very much.
Okay, well let's make everything illegal.
Let me tell you why I'm not a prohibitionist. Because I think a lot of people can drink and not get drunk. I mean,
not enough to keep down those rates we were just talking about.
But they use drugs to get high.
Well,
everybody that uses drugs gets high. Everybody that drinks does not get drunk. And
well, then I think they missed the experience.
Well, then don't drive on my highway.
I mean, they ain't selling a lot of sort of near beer. Last time I checked, I mean, people would be drinking that if they didn't drink for the effect.
You know, another real effect, I think, of alcohol that you have to consider is detection. It's real easy to protect yourself from somebody that's under the influence of alcohol. They'll stagger, or they'll smell, or they'll slur their words.
But drug users perform better, and that makes them worse.
It's hard to keep a drugged doctor out of an operating room, but you can't tell.
You can go on the offensive now. Lois, go right ahead.
All right. First of all,
I didn't think she was offensive.
Well, she will be now.
Thank you. Is that one of the tests for this show?
Yeah,
Be offensive? I come from California, so of course my interest was piqued right away by your statistic in California. Do you know what the population in California is?
It's a lot less than Great Britain and Italy
Well, wait,
combined.
tell me what it is.
27 million people,
Close. 30 million people. Do you know how many people in prison?
100,000.
Close. Do you know how many heroin addicts there are alone in Great Britain? 80,000.
No, I don't think that's
Now,
correct.
how do you get your population figures?
How do I get my population figures? I know that in Great Britain
I
and
mean,
Italy
they have only
combined, there's probably
20,000
100 million
people.
people.
They only have 20,000 people? Oh, I see what you mean. So the way you said that kind of skewed that. I want to ask you
Well,
something,
that's our
Mr.
job
Dennis.
here, isn't it, to skew things?
I guess. Mr. Dennis, I want to ask you something, because I've heard you speak several times, and you always say that classic thing that this is a victimless crime. Do you still believe that?
I do believe that.
You do believe that?
Which
So that the child that is born addicted to cocaine is not a victim of drugs?
they're a victim of they may be a victim of a crime.
Okay.
But doing drugs in itself without a special situation like that is clearly a victimless crime.
Most drug users are in their childbearing years, right? I mean, you kind of get that. Most
Sure.
drug users are relatively young.
Sure.
So when they have children, and the children are born addicted, you're saying that that is a crime. Now, you agree
Yes.
that that is a crime. Okay, what about the child that's abused and neglected?
That's a crime.
By people under the influence of drugs.
Well, it's a crime whether they're under the influence of drugs or Twinkies, right?
Well, I guess so.
See, I want to judge people on what they do. You want to judge people on sort of how it is they got to do what they do. And it seems to me that society has a complex enough job punishing people for the things they do that are wrong. We can't look into their minds and see what the motivation is or decide what chemicals it was or it wasn't.
Mr. Dennis, don't you feel that the real thing that you have to do is deter people from doing things wrong?
I
Don't you think that
yes,
you want to do
yes,
everything
yes.
you can to make sure they don't get in those positions?
Yes, and I don't think law enforcement adds to that. And I think the statistics show that. But further, I think it deludes us if we think that the answer isn't persuasion. I mean, that's what's worked with cigarettes. Since 1979, you won't like the statistic, but it's true. Many more millions of people have given up alcohol and tobacco than illegal drugs.
I don't think you can compare cigarettes and the seductiveness and the excitement and the pleasurable effect of drugs. I simply don't think you can compare.
You make it sound great.
Yes.
Well, you know what? I'm afraid it is, and we have to fight really hard so other people don't get involved, because once they do, we can't get them off of it.
Let me go back to this victimless crime thing, because everybody is going to jump up and down and tell me all sorts of stories about people who take drugs and then do bad things to their family, their friends,
do.
their society, the GNP,
a quarter
the interest
of the
rate,
murders are
the
family
30-year
related.
interest rate. I mean, that is not what we mean in society when we talk about a victimless crime.
It
all
isn't?
sorts. Well, you tell me. Does divorce do that? Does laziness do that? Do 3 martini lunches do that? Do taking 3 vacations a year instead of 2? Do all those things that sort of people give as examples that debilitate us?
That is such a non sequitur. I can't even conceive of it. Let me ask you something. Let me just change the subject a little. Are you thinking of having this? You're a commodity trader, right? Are you now thinking that you're going to see bales of marijuana and cocoa leaves on the Chicago Mercantile?
No, in the interest of not having a conflict of interest, I think we'll eschew that.
Well, who's going to sell this?
It's going to be done by the same people who bring you alcohol and tobacco, probably.
And you think that, there are going to be lawyers and there are going to be insurance companies that say, go ahead with the drugs, even though we know all the hideous things they do and there won't be liability, and people are really going to do that? Or
Well,
do you think the government's going to have to do it?
I think tort liability is a mess that we ought to clean up for its own merits, and we'd have to clean it up to legalize drugs also.
Oh, so before you want to legalize drugs, you want to clean up the tort law?
And I can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Well, you've also said a lot in reports that I've read. In fact, I heard you say this, that you said that the test of the appropriate standard of whether a drug should be made legal is whether it's more likely than alcohol to cause direct harm to an innocent bystander. Do you still believe that?
Yes.
All right. Now that we know what percentage of people that we have under the influence of alcohol, and we know which percentage, and I talked about that earlier with marijuana, do you think that under the influence, we know that it's 5 times more dangerous to be under the influence of marijuana with traffic fatalities? Does that go with that?
Your number is just wrong. That's all I can say.
When you start talking statistics, your time is up. Thank you very much, both of you.
I didn't know that.
Dr. Kildare Clarke, please.
The onus of responsibility should be placed where it rightfully belongs, on the individual, not in the hands of a selected few who decide rightfulness and wrongfulness based on emotional conviction rather than on consensus and facts. Drug use cuts across all racial, ethnic, social, educational, religious, and socioeconomic level. To continue to support a failed drug policy is tantamount to genocide in general and genocide to blacks in specific. The illicit use of drugs with its concomitant violence is destroying the inner city, and at this present time, it makes blacks male become an endangered species. Must we wait until the streets of the suburbs are paved with the blood of the privileged, as currently occurring in the inner city, before we arrive at the foregone conclusion that legalization of drugs is the only rational means to deal with the public health system which is failing as it currently occurs? The drug use as it continues in the inner city with the violence for turf control has generated such enormous business to the emergency department that the doctors are going and leaving the emergency department because they can no longer continue.
You can finish your sentence. Someone want to take on that?
Dr.
Reverend
Clarke,
Falwell.
you work in an emergency department at a hospital in Brooklyn, do you not?
That's correct.
What percentage of the persons brought in there on a regular basis are injured or ill as a result of a drug relation?
Are you talking about trauma, or are you talking about patient in general? You've got to be specific.
Both. If the person coming in is a victim of a crime caused by someone who was under the influence of drugs, or the person himself or herself is a victimless object, which I don't believe in, what would be
90 to 95% of our major stab wound and gunshot wounds are the result of the drug trade.
95%.
95%.
And you just said
either because they are the innocent or not so innocent.
And you just said that this kind of thing threatens the very existence of black males in this country.
Yes.
Why in God's name would you want to make it legal then?
Because of the amount of money which is involved with it. The fight is about control of turf, not drugs. Drugs are not the things which are causing these people to be in the emergency room per se. It's the money which is being made from it and the fight for the turf control.
Dr.
That
Clarke,
is what's causing
Dr.
the
Clarke,
problem.
with all due respect to your proficiency in the area, I have worked for 32 years with a ministry to addicts, a home that we founded, operate, and we have, through our alumni who've come through that home and been delivered from alcohol and drugs, they have gone out and opened many such programs. At Liberty University, we train young people to actually work with addicts.
Is there
and
a question?
I can tell you that the point that you are making, that to remove prohibition of drugs will eliminate that because of the gang war that no longer is ludicrous. And I would ask this question: if
No,
in fact,
I disagree with you. It would not be ludicrous. We are looking at a health problem, not a legal problem. It rightfully places in the health domain where we can start treat those people. At the present moment, we cannot treat those people because they are not within our domain to treat them.
All right, Congressman Rangel.
Doctor, Dr. Falwell asked you about those patients that come into the emergency ward, and you got off in talking about those patients that you treat for violent injuries. Now let's talk about,
Congressman,
could I ask you a
yes,
question?
go ahead.
How many of the cases that come into the emergency ward are illnesses that are directly related to drug abuse? What percentage?
Very rarely do we see that anymore. During my time,
I'm
there are
talking
over
about
50...
heart disease, strokes, hepatitis. I'm talking about kidney failure. Are you telling me that those diseases at your hospital are not related to drug abuse?
Yes, I am telling you that, Congressman, because you are not in touch with your constituency to recognize that you do not understand what is going on. I will tell you, Congressman, I will tell you this emphatically, that the problem with the disease which you are talking about will come because people have to get unpurified drugs, use dirty needles, contract AIDS, spread AIDS, and then we got it
right now, the diseases,
that's what we're getting it from.
Right now, so you say it's dirty drugs. So you say they wouldn't have the diseases with clean drugs.
We would have quality control, Congressman.
Oh, I see.
Quality control.
And let me ask
you
you
are
this,
making
Doctor.
one fundamental mistake, Congressman, to believe because we advocate drug legalization that we are advocating the use of drugs. We're not, Congressman. We are talking about getting some control where we can treat it as a medical problem, which it rightfully is.
Doctor, you asked the question whether or not doctors who prescribe legal drugs are drug dealers.
Yes, they are drug dealers.
I bet your life they're drug dealers.
Absolutely.
And a lot of them are illegal drug dealers, and they're in my community.
That's exactly
And they belong
correct.
to your profession.
That's correct, Congressman. I will not deny that fact, and that's what you're supposed to be cleaning up.
And I'm telling
you are not doing it.
All right.
And if we make it legal.
You guys are young. I told you that Congressman Rangel would be extremely shy and reticent, but you seem to have brought him out. Do you have a question, Mrs. Herrington?
Yeah.
I think. I just want to know, Doctor, would you prescribe PCP or LSD? Would you advise your patients and your people to use these drugs?
You are asking a question without first understanding what we mean by legalization. We are not talking that I want a doctor to go out and start prescribing. We are saying that the people who will have the drugs available to them. Yes.
At last, someone who respects the gavel. Thank you very much, Dr. Clarke. Reverend Falwell. Minute and a half.
It has been a tough year for some of us conservatives because some of our mentors have defected. Pat Buchanan opposed the war, and William Buckley's over here advocating the legalization of drugs. I am not here as a legislator. That is the job of the congressman and others like him, or a jurist, or a social engineer armed with statistics, but rather as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ who, like many others out there, pastors, counselors, Christian workers, etc., and I would add Dr. Voth to that role, who are responsible for picking up the debris after the ODs and after the family destruction and after the moral breakdown of traditional values in the society, which clearly are being ravaged by the drug epidemic in our country. I'm not here to argue the merits of what is proper punishment or what is improper punishment or who should be punished. But I'm here to say that there are 2 or 3 issues at stake if we as Christian leaders and as Jewish and religious leaders around our nation are to have the respect of our people to whom we minister, particularly young people. Number one, there's no question that to legalize drugs in the mind of the average American youth is to give tacit approval to its goodness, its acceptability, and regardless what the punishment is, be it minor or whatever, I oppose such tacit approval for the sake of those young people who have not yet become victims.
Thank you. Someone have a question for Reverend Falwell? Ira Glasser.
If you think that the law gives tacit approval, how do you account for the fact that among young people and among adults in general, there is tremendous disapproval today compared with 20 years ago for cigarettes without making them illegal? How do you account for that kind of an attitude change?
I place cigarettes and obesity, which I don't preach on very often,
you ought to thank your lucky stars it isn't a crime yet.
Category, Ira, that these can in no intelligent way be compared with the dangers of crack or cocaine or heroin. I don't think there's any comparison.
How many
whatsoever.
people died from cigarettes last year?
Probably 300,000.
400. How many people died from cocaine?
That is not the issue. The issue,
It isn't?
The issue is not just physical
So
death.
which was worse?
I am a person who works with the victim, Ira, and I know that that is not where you've been called. You do what you're called very well. You cause me a lot of pain.
Different kind of victim.
But I am called to work with that person whose mind is blown, who can no longer work, who can no longer care for children, function as a successful parent,
And you think he's better off if he's in jail?
in jail? I said I will not even get into what punishment is.
Well, that's
correct.
what we're talking about.
But I'm talking about if we legalize drugs, it is common sense. Now, in the South, we know what that means, Ira. It is common sense that it is common sense that the number of persons now using those drugs when they can buy them at the 7-Eleven will multiply.
Mr. Buckley.
Dr. Falwell, our society permits the Democratic Party to exist. Does that mean it has our tacit approval?
Absolutely not.
I was afraid of that.
We tolerate the National Enquirer. Some states have gambling. I really don't understand your assumption that because something is permitted, it has the moral approbation of the society that permits it.
Well, I think the greatest case in point, Bill, is this one. In 1973, we legalized abortion on demand. The numbers went up several thousand% to 1.5 million abortions annually since that time. Whether you agree or disagree with abortion, and I happen to disagree with it, regardless how you feel on that point, once we made it legal, the numbers skyrocketed, and the same thing will happen when a 21-year-old uncle can walk in 7-Eleven or wherever you guys want to sell it and buy crack or cocaine or heroin and come outside and give it to a 16-year-old nephew. The numbers will multiply. He's addicted the first use, and away he goes.
Well, in the first place, you can't prove that. And unhappily, many arguments of the prohibitionists simply depend on assumptions which they aren't in a position empirically to verify any more than they might have predicted 10 years ago that the incidence of cigarette smoking would descend as dramatically as it has. But remember, I asked a question about approbation. And the answer is probably half the American people have no objection to abortion. So therefore, you are posing a moral point and then retreating from the imperatives of your own thinking.
No, that's Yale thinking.
Unless you're going to say that we should simply outlaw everything we disapprove of and simply assume that there will be an acquiescent majority.
Let's call that a question.
That's like Rich's victimless crime. That betrays the fact that he doesn't work with drug addicts. There's no such thing as a victimless user of drugs, because once that drug destroys a daddy, the children are victims. The wife is a victim.
There's nothing like that.
Richard Dennis, do you have a question?
That is for sure. But to answer the question, I don't think that anybody in this room, including Bill Buckley, thinks that if we legalize hard drugs and anyone can buy them at any time in any quantity, it isn't going to increase the usage of it.
A brief question.
Well, let me
Dennis.
ask you what should be an easy question. LA Police Chief Gates recently said that he thought it might be a neat idea to take casual users out and execute them.
That's why he's about to lose his job.
Well,
He's about to lose his job because he got caught.
among other reasons. But as a moral leader, won't you join us, everyone, in condemning that sort of excess? And won't you admit that there's been a lot of excess in the war on drugs?
This is off the subject, but Chief Gates should be fired, if not for endorsing the conduct of his officers, for stupidity and judgment in not firing them in 30 seconds upon seeing
that
the
is
film.
off the subject. Why don't you answer Mr.
But
Dennis's
you
question?
brought Mr. Gates up.
I'm talking about
how does that fit in with legalization?
Because it's one of the big excesses of the war on drugs, and I would think no matter what you thought the law should be, that sort of talk, it should be condemned, and firmly. And I don't hear it being condemned.
You want to condemn it or you want to sit down?
I condemn whatever you want to condemn.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to remember that.
Thank you. Mr. Buckley. Now, the opposition team can question Mr. Buckley, but let me remind everyone at this point that this show works like Jeopardy. Your questions must be in the form of a question. Who would like to start?
This legalization, you say that you're not condoning it, but you would permit it. The doctor here believes that doctors should distribute it. Do you agree with that? The doctors should be involved? Well,
Look,
let me ask, who should distribute the drugs?
You're asking a very difficult question which I'm not competent to answer and you're not competent to ask.
Let's say this.
Dr. Harold Grinspoon of the medical school at Harvard University has written a book on the subject in which he cites 4 or 5 individual instances in which marijuana, he believes, not only ought to be prescribed, but that it's dereliction not to do so. I'm not in a position to argue with him, and neither are you.
The reason you're standing there is to answer questions. Now, the basic question is, if you have a consumer and you say that drug should be permitted, and you know there's a supply, are you telling me that I have to read some book written by your friend to have you to suggest
Mr. Rank, I'll read it to you if necessary.
Drugs to the consumer?
Mr. Chairman, in answering a question, I can characterize the quality of that question, can I not?
Yeah, but you should also answer it.
Well, I did. If I say it's an unanswerable question, that's an answer.
Well, should it
You're the boss. Let's get Dr. Voth in here.
Mr. Buckley. Mr. Buckley, I hope you don't ever have to have bypass surgery. But let me ask you something. Let's say you have a surgeon that you've gone to and he diagnoses severe coronary disease, and you know that every so often he smokes marijuana or regularly or uses cocaine. Would you let him open your chest? Now give me an answer to that. Don't duck it. You know you're a master at ducking questions.
The answer is, I would tend to go to a doctor that I trusted.
Yeah, no, I didn't ask you that.
I
said, would you go to him if you knew that he smokes marijuana and uses cocaine?
Now, that is not an unanswerable question.
No, well, I would say
Buckley.
I would say it would depend on his other skills.
Oh, come on. I said you were a master at ducking questions. Now, come on,
Not
Mr.
at all.
Buckley.
I mean,
give it a straight answer.
For all I know, Einstein smoked marijuana.
Oh, BS.
It doesn't
come
mean
on,
that
you're ducking it. Give me a straight
I'm
answer.
telling you that I would look.
Would
I would
you
look
or
at his
would
general
you not
qualifications.
let him open your chest?
If I could see the records of 5,000 people whose chests he had opened and who were winning golf tournaments, I'd say yes.
Well, you're not going to see that many records.
This is Herrington.
Wait a minute. Wait.
No.
He's not going to show you those records.
I'll insist on it.
So you wouldn't let him do it, would you?
No, I'll insist
What
on
about the pilot that flew you over here from Europe, and you knew he had smoked crack the night before, or used it, and smoked marijuana? Would you have gotten into that plane?
Well, I
Come
think
on, Mr. Buckley.
Dr. Voth, you're asking me, would I do something stupid? And
You
no,
answered. Thank you. You've answered the question. Thank you. You gave me an answer.
I don't know what you proved.
You answered the question.
I don't know what you proved, but congratulations.
Well, plenty. I proved plenty. I proved you have good judgment.
All right.
Mr. Buckley, I hope there isn't a book on this, but if you wanted to influence choices and you wanted to encourage people to do something, you would advertise that. Is that correct? Would you advertise, allow people to advertise, hope they did advertise drug use?
Would I allow them to advertise drug use?
Mm-hmm. Legalize and have the Children's Garden of Grass or Acapulco Gold or...
Ms. Herrington, you've missed an awful lot of what we're trying to say. We think there should be a very positive consensus against the use of drugs.
And so
we can't even advertise alcohol on television. Why should we advertise PCP, for heaven's sakes?
So you would ban
society
advertising?
ought to mobilize itself against the consumption of drugs, which is very different from putting 800,000 people in jail every year as we try to do.
400,000.
800,000 people were arrested last year.
But 400,000 people are in jail as we speak tonight.
Or actually, the figure is 690,000. But
Mr. Falwell, here go those statistics again. Mr. Falwell.
Bill, you're under oath. Do you really believe the position you're taking? Are you trying to help us win this thing by being on that side?
My feeling is that there is a natural evolution in human intelligence, and that it is a sovereign responsibility of rational people to take empirical data into their general reckoning. I was against the position I am now taking until I became convinced by the data that it was a futile position, and that many human beings are dead as a result of something that has proved absolutely nothing at all, quite the contrary, which is why I'm a joyful convert
So you're really
to
over
my
there.
position.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Rangel. And I guess I should also warn that answers must be in the form of an answer as well. Does someone have a question for the Congressman?
Yes, sure.
Let Dr. Clarke.
Congressman Rangel, you
It's not
represent...
wrangling, it's wrangle, but
Wrangle.
continue.
Wrangling is better to me. Maybe it sounds like
I
something
understand.
dangling. You represent Harlem, and you vehemently oppose and talk vehemently about the amount of people, black, which would die in the Middle East. You know, disproportionate number of blacks joining the army. Yet the war on drugs, where the disproportionate number of people dying in your constituency and also in other inner city, and yet you're willing to support a failed drug policy of the current administration. Could you explain that to your constituent? Or the second part of it, or do you think you're just the recipient of racial compensation law, and then maybe therefore you should resign from Congress and let somebody carry out the will of the people from your constituency?
Doctor, I think that perhaps you're new here, that you're not familiar with the size of my congressional district. And blacks really constitute a sizable number, but my district covers far more than just Harlem. A visit to Manhattan might enlighten you as to what's going on in the city of New York. Let me share this with you. As a combat veteran, I was concerned with the number of minorities that were in and exposed to combat. But that doesn't mean that their victory and that the fact that they were able to perform so marvelously does not take away from the fact that they took the cream of the crop in our inner cities. Those that were not dealing with drugs, those that had graduated from high school. What I think that you ought to concern yourself with is the number of kids that drop out of high school, that are homeless, that have no hope, that have no jobs. And unfortunately, many of the people in your profession open up stores to give them highs and to lows, to put them on Medicaid, to have the federal government paying for it. If we legalize drugs, there will be a lot of immoral doctors indeed that would expand their practice by dispensing these drugs. Hopefully you will not be included in that number.
Mr. Dennis.
Could you give us a straight answer about alcohol prohibition? We keep asking the other side what they think of that, and we really don't get an answer. 3 times as many people are murdered under the influence of alcohol as illegal drugs.
Well, I'll try to
And
answer.
4
First
times,
of all,
prohibition was a good idea. We should bring it back.
I think Ms. Herrington really told you that there are a lot of people that drink wine, that have cocktails, and after they've had 1 or 2, they're satisfied with it. When you're talking about crack, Mr. Dennis, you're not talking about where people can turn it on and turn it off. Neither are you talking about children being born in the hospital addicted to a drink of wine
I think they're addicted
as they
to alcohol.
are addicted to crack.
There's a
And
lot
so
more
what I'm
addicted to
saying
alcohol.
is this, that sure, we should have restricted the use of tobacco and alcohol a long time ago because of the abuse that we've seen.
Didn't we
But you
try that?
you cannot compare the drinking of wine with the addiction to
I can
crack.
compare the social damage and know that there's a lot more from
I
the
don't
alcohol.
think so. If you visit our hospitals, especially the emergency wards, you will see that a lot of the people that have damaged themselves by abusing crack have acquired many other illnesses. If you take a look at the children in intensive care at $1,500 a day, which the doctors make money, but certainly
Of course, you can't find the alcohol and tobacco
abusers
abusers because they're dead.
But I'm saying that if you take a look at the number of people that are born addicted to crack, not suffering from addicted to wine, you will see that you're talking about 2 different diseases, and they are diseases.
And there's more people addicted to
Ira
alcohol.
Glasser.
Congressman Rangel, are more kids born damaged by alcohol that their mother used or by cocaine?
I would say that the damage is far more severe by cocaine crack.
Well, you would say that, and you did, but you're wrong. And if you would review the scientific and medical literature, you would find that there is literally no disagreement among medical researchers who have been researching into those problems in the literature as to the fact that the damage from alcohol is far worse and far more extensive.
Dr. Glasser,
it would be good if you had a mild acquaintance with the facts when you
Dr.
start debating these
Glasser,
issues.
if you were to visit the hospitals that are located in the inner city, then you will find, and have your ignorance, removed on this subject, that when you go to intensive care, they don't have the booths there for the children that are born to
Maybe when
alcoholic
Mr.
parents.
Buckley reads you the book from Harvard, he can also read you
I'm
the study.
saying-
You don't know anything by walking into an emergency room and giving it an eyeball.
Mr. Glasser, you may get...
Charlie.
Your knowledge of drugs probably are limited to your friends in Harvard. But what you have to do, really, what you have to do is visit the hospitals...
And what is your knowledge of drugs limited to?
If you please let me answer, Ira.
No, I don't want to let you answer.
I know
because
you
you're
don't,
not.
Well,
really,
I think you
you're
should
not
let him
answering.
answer. You should let him answer.
No, I want you to answer the question.
I'm trying to. If you really want to find out the health hazards that's due to drug abuse, certainly you go to the areas that have the highest population of drug addicts and look at the hospitals that service them. And you will find that doctors and hospitals all over would show you that it's not only just the addiction to the drugs and the OD because of drugs, but the illnesses that are associated with it. And I'll be glad to take you there on Monday morning.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Falwell and Mr. Glasser. And it's your opportunity to question Reverend Falwell.
Reverend Falwell, you said before, in talking about the stabbings and the killings that Dr. Clarke was mentioning, that they were caused mostly, you thought, by people under the influence of illegal drugs.
No, he said that.
Do you believe that?
I asked the question. He said 95% of them were. I assume
No, he said the opposite. He said that 95% of them were caused by trauma that was the result of gunshots and knives having to do. Why don't you answer the question and let him take his turn?
That's what he did say, and you misquoting him, so you're
Well,
down
now I'm
a
asking
rabbit
you.
trail.
I'm asking you. What do you think? Do you think most of the deaths from most of the homicides are caused by people under the influence of the drug? Or do you think that they're caused by dealers and their customers settling commercial disputes with automatic weapons? Now, I warn you, there are facts here.
I know, and I told you earlier.
If you don't know, you can just say
I
so.
told you earlier that I didn't come armed with statistics. I came as a minister of the gospel to tell you that what I believe in my heart, and I believe most Americans believe, that to legalize heroin and cocaine and crack, and to say that because at this point in time, since it's under prohibition, not as many are being killed as by alcohol, is a very empty argument on your part.
Well, we're talking about public policy, and unfortunately, you do have to look at facts. They matter. They matter. There was a study in New York of homicides under the influence of cocaine. 87% of them were committed by people not under the influence of cocaine, but settling disputes with guns. There were very few that were done under the influence of cocaine. Now, that's a fact that may disturb your moral common sense, but it's a fact we have to deal with. The policy that is killing people in the streets is the policy that flows from the prohibition on drugs, not from the drug itself. More people kill themselves and kill other people under the influence of alcohol than under the influence of cocaine. But we've got Al Capone out there, only much worse. And those kinds of murders don't happen anymore around alcohol.
Yeah, what
the
is the
question
question?
is if it's true that most of these killings are the result of the law, don't you even want to think about repealing the law?
I do not. That would be like saying, since most people speed, let's remove all the speeding laws. That's like saying we have safe cracking and we have murder and rape in this country.
So why don't you want to have alcohol
why don't we make it
prohibition?
legal?
So why don't you want to have
absolutely
alcohol?
ridiculous. Only the ACLU.
No, not only the ACLU.
could think of that.
Not only the ACLU. Mr. Buckley, George Schultz, Milton Friedman,
he
all
just
your
on
half
your
your
side
friends,
to lead
because
you down
half
the
your
pipe.
friends are looking at the facts. Would you be in favor of restoring alcohol prohibition?
I don't think I would,
Why?
but because I don't think that you can compare. I don't use alcoholic beverages, and I wish nobody did. But
Don't you think it would send a moral signal out there?
I think that when you try to compare wine and beer with Heroin, crack, and cocaine, even you know there's no comparison.
No. I know that there is a comparison, and I'll tell you what it is. You're the one who doesn't know. You said that when people use drugs like heroin and cocaine, they're instantly addicted and it's over. They can't just take a drink the way you do maybe at night, or the way I do, or the way anyone else does. Well, what about that? You think they can do that with marijuana or heroin?
Again, having never used any of it, and I'm not bragging, I'm thankful. I can't answer whether it's the first use of crack or the second use that addicts one, but very early on, crack takes on a different attraction than beer or wine, and I'm sure you know that.
What about cocaine and heroin?
Pretty close to the same.
How do you know that?
Well, I do read. You instructed us to
Yeah,
read.
well, so tell me how you know that. What have you been reading?
I read some of your writings, and Mr. Dennis's, and I've read some of Bill's, and a lot of physicians.
Well, did you know that in the Netherlands, where marijuana was made legal, use went down, and that no more than 10% of people who use that use it habitually?
I read what you said about that and what Congressman Newt Gingrich said. Both of you had different conclusions from the same study.
No, I'm talking about what the study said.
So I'd rather come back to my point of view that to legalize hard drugs is going to hurt a lot of innocent children in this country that you have no responsibility for.
Well, let's stay off
but
the facts if you're
400,000
uncomfortable
pastors and
with them.
rabbis.
Would you repeal bans on clean needles?
Repeal bans?
Yeah, it's now a crime to give somebody a clean needle. Would you repeal that?
In the first place, that has nothing to do with the subject we're talking about here. Obviously,
You want to make him answer the question like you did poor Bill?
I tried to make Buckley without any success, so why should I make her?
Well, try again.
Yeah.
Said no, I wouldn't.
I'll tell you what the relevance is. The relevance is that because of prohibition, a doctor cannot give a clean needle to a person who's drug addicted, and that's why 60% of drug addicts are spreading AIDS all over the city of New York.
Okay, you can go on the offensive now if you
all
want.
right, I'd like to ask you, if in fact you're going to legalize drugs, tell me how you are going to structure that legalization. Certainly you're not going to sell drugs to children. Maybe you're not going to legalize crack. I don't know. Give me the structure of the legalization that you suggest.
Well, you do it differently for different drugs, just the way we do it differently now. Some drugs you might want to have under prescription. Some drugs you might want to sell like alcohol.
Tell me which
cigarettes.
ones you're thinking about.
Well, I think you could sell marijuana about the way that you sell alcohol. You would not sell it to children. You would regulate its purity. You would regulate its potency. And maybe some people would do it illegally, like some people do moonshine.
Who would
I
sell that,
understand,
the government
but
or
it's
the
not a
private
big
sector?
problem. The private sector would sell it. I don't think that there's any reason why you couldn't do that for marijuana.
What about
I don't
crack?
think
What
that there's
about
any.
crack?
I think if you had low potency cocaine, the Peruvian Indians, chew coca leaves. They think we're crazy for snorting this stuff, but they chew coca leaves, and it's very low potency. We used to have it here in Coca-Cola. You know that. Didn't drive the people crazy. The world didn't collapse. Folks weren't getting shot in the
So you'd
streets.
sell cocaine across the
So you might have low potency
How
levels.
about heroin?
Heroin, this may come as a big shock to you, but heroin is one of the blandest drugs we have. Aside from the property of addiction.
There's not a heroin addict out there listening to you. Who
There's
doesn't
not a
think too
heroin
much.
addict out there that's ever had pure heroin. What they're dying from is not the heroin.
Oh, you'd give them pure heroin.
That's right, I would. Why would you want to give someone impure? If you took an aspirin, would you want there to be poison in there? I mean, Tylenol just pulled all that stuff off the shelves.
So
But
you
on the
would-
streets,
So all right, the next
we
question
allow
is,
poison to be sold.
Do you think then, when you're selling cocaine over the counter, marijuana over the counter, heroin over the counter, and crack over the counter also?
I wouldn't sell crack over the counter, but I got to tell you something.
Well,
we
would
have
you?
crack.
Now, you're getting too restrictive.
We have
now. You're
crack.
violating my rights.
And not a moment too soon. Right? The reason we have crack is because of the interdiction policies on marijuana. Ask
Ice.
Sheriff Navarro in
What about
Florida
ice?
about that. The reason why we had moonshine too, we had wood alcohol too, but people don't want
But
that
you
stuff.
don't
if they
ask
can
I
get
think
it.
you should- I think you should answer that question.
Will
Which
you
question?
sell
Would you
crack over the
legalize
counter?
crack for
Yes,
sale
or no?
over the
I just said
counter?
I wouldn't.
You would
but
not?
I don't think that anybody
Oh,
wants
that's
it.
prohibition.
How many people use crack?
Well, I mean, do you?
No.
No, I don't either.
Good.
But all I'm asking is, why won't
Do
you
you eat
sell-
eggs? Do you
but
eat
there
eggs and
are
steak?
people
How's your
who do wanna
cholesterol,
buy it. Why
Reverend?
won't you sell it to others? Why won't you sell it to others?
Let me ask you this, since you raised
No,
the
no,
issue.
no. I'm asking the
no,
question.
he's asking
You
the
got
question.
your
He's
shot.
asking the question.
You will not sell crack. So that
I don't even sell cigarettes.
there will be a split in the
I sell Salvation,
There'll
but
be
of
a
a different
split in
kind.
the ACLU to oppose you not selling crack to those underprivileged crack users. But assuming you sell it all over the counter, Ira, do you think the increase of usage would be dramatic?
I don't think that anybody knows, but I can tell you what some of the experience has been.
Well,
in the Netherlands,
no,
you want me to answer the question, or you want to ask another question?
I want to ask another question on top.
Well, wait until I answer
you
that
said,
one.
You said you don't think anybody knows. But suppose...
No, that isn't what I said.
Suppose
What
the
I said,
majority...
Reverend
that's
Falwell,
what you said.
if you're going to
Did you
answer
report
a
that?
question, if you're going to ask a question, let me answer it.
You said you don't think anybody knows.
I said that I don't think anybody knows, but there is some evidence.
You said. Now,
in the Netherlands...
Now, since nobody knows...
I'm not going to let you keep asking that
suppose-
question. I'm not going to let you answer that
All right.
question.
Suppose most Americans
You were going to let me
are
answer
right,
the
Ira.
question,
I'm
or
gonna
I'm
let
going
you-
to
I'll
keep
let
on
you
talking.
No, all right, look, boys.
Don't play Charlie Rangel.
Yeah.
In the Netherlands, they legalized marijuana, and usage went down. In the Netherlands, they legalized marijuana, and usage went down.
You only have to answer it once. Go ahead.
All right, now...
And you only have to hear it once.
If in fact most Americans with common sense, and there's some of that in the North too, would believe that the usage would go dramatically up, and suddenly, like 100 million Americans who use alcohol, there are 100 million using drugs, what would you propose then we should do about it?
Reverend Falwell, you are talking about what people believe, because that's the area you're comfortable with. But I'm talking about what people know.
So you
And
don't have
that's
any
an area
confidence
I'm
in the American
comfortable
people
with.
then at all?
I do not believe that there is any evidence to show that the drug use would go up the way you say it would. After Prohibition, alcohol went up briefly, and it has gone down steadily for 50 years as a proportion of total consumption. In the Netherlands, where they legalized marijuana, consumption went down. There is nothing but fear and belief based on no facts to suggest that we're going to have 100 million drug addicts. Would you take cocaine if it was legal tomorrow?
I'm asking the questions.
I didn't think you'd want to answer that one. You wouldn't, and neither would most people.
All right, neither one of you is going to get to ask any more for the moment. Thank you very much. Rich Dentis, it's your turn to submit to interrogation by the opposition team. Who wants to start?
I'd like to continue where Reverend Falwell left off. Did you notice how Ira Glasser understood the question that was asked of him at dealing with the distribution, and was able to mumble that he would not allow crack to be sold, that he would prohibit that? Would you support that position or not?
First of all, I think whether crack is legal or illegal will have very little effect on use.
My question was, would you support the position that was just mumbled by Ira Glasser?
Well, I'm not sure what he mumbled, but...
He said that he would prohibit the sale of crack.
Well, let me tell you that 2 years ago, I might have agreed with that.
I'm asking, what is your position this evening?
I was getting to that.
Oh.
And I wasn't going to go through the whole 2 years every day. I was going to say... I would have agreed with that 2 years ago. Now I don't. What people are overlooking is that when use goes beyond a certain point, whether we like it or not...
Now that you would prohibit the sale of crack...
No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't.
You would sell crack?
Well, I wouldn't sell it. As a matter of fact, I would expect...
Who would sell it? Who would sell it?
Whoever wanted to make a legal product and sell it at a profit.
Would the doctors sell it?
No, they don't sell drugs for profit.
Oh, yes, they do sell drugs for profit.
Well, at least they pretend they don't.
Oh, no. How about the pharmaceuticals? Will they be allowed to manufacture it and sell it?
Well, I answered the question. Anybody who wanted to get into business, like the business of selling whiskey.
Would it be in the A&P, in the supermarkets? Would they sell it? In the candy store?
No.
Dispensing machines?
No.
Well, you said anybody. I run a soda machines and dispensers, and I want to put it in there like the
Legalization
cigarettes.
does not mean lack of regulation.
How would you regulate it? Where would you cut off the sale? You said anyone who wants to sell it. Where would you cut it off? Who would be prohibited from selling it, and to whom?
I think you would probably, first of all, you'd prohibit advertising. Everyone asks about that.
No, I asked you a question.
Okay, he's got it. Go ahead.
The question is, how would you would regulate it by zoning? You would regulate it
Who
by
would be
time and place?
prohibited from selling it, and to whom?
People who weren't zoned correctly. Like
Voth.
yourself.
Dr. Voth.
Ira.
Dr. Voth. Dr. Voth.
Let me ask you a
I
question.
zone correctly.
Dr. Voth.
If I wanted investment advice, would you recommend that I went to a veterinarian or a physician or an investment expert like you, for instance, a commodity trader? If I wanted to make some money trading commodities, who should I go to?
I'm going to disappoint you on this one.
No, not go to you?
I wouldn't go to an expert.
You wouldn't?
No.
What do you make of the fact that most of the advocates of legalization are non-physicians, like you and you and you, and you perplex me. But what do you understand of that? The physicians who really understand the chemistry of addiction, the psychology of it, the ravages that drugs perpetrate, how do you explain the fact that people that really understand the phenomenon are against legalization, and yet non-physicians are the ones that are proponents? How do you explain that?
Because it isn't a question of chemistry. It's a question of political science.
You just revealed your ignorance because you do not understand what cocaine does to the neurotransmitters and so on and so forth.
But I understand what it does to the society, and I can make the judgment that it does more harm to the society to ban it than not, and so can Mr. Glasser and Mr. Buckley or whatever.
Do all of these casualties that fall prey to drugs not do harm to society?
I didn't say that it didn't do harm to society. I said that the drug war and keeping it illegal did more harm.
See, you're always ducking the question.
What's the question?
How is it that non-physicians
Physicians
are the
know
advocates of legalization?
I don't see why you would want a physician to comment on this any more than you'd want a butcher to comment on the problem of cholesterol.
Because physicians understand the phenomenon, and they're against it. The vast majorities of the medical profession are against legalization because they know what will happen. They understand addiction.
It's not about addiction. It's about what happens to the innocent people out here when people have to steal to get the money to do the drugs. What does that have to do with being a doctor?
Mrs. Herrington.
Mr. Dennis, would you sell to children?
I would not sell to anybody. I mean,
would it be legal to sell to children?
I would use every ounce I had to discourage adults and children to use the drug. But what I wouldn't do is use the power of government, because that's what costs society more than it saves it.
Well, you rang my bell. Well, how are you going to stop them? How are you going to stop people? We haven't been very rampaging successful with alcohol.
I'm going to take Dr. Falwell's route. I believe all the good we've done in reducing drugs is persuasion, and a few very messy examples like Len Bias of how bad it can be.
Well, they certainly all didn't stop after that, man. Oh, go on. No, that's fine.
Very briefly. You're failing to answer a question. Does that mean that you would be in favor of selling to children?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Why not?
Okay.
Why not?
Yeah.
Because we protect children unlike adults.
Well, I want to know, what are the sanctions going to be for the seller to children?
About what they are now.
What's that?
Very harsh.
What is harsh?
Years in prison.
Years in prison when the median time served for drug trafficking is 14 months?
Okay, that's a rhetorical question.
And it's an incorrect statistic also.
Thanks very much. Lois Herrington, you can continue your dialogue. If Richard Dennis wants to ask Lois a question, here's his chance.
Now that
Dr. Clarke, why don't you go?
Lois, what's your understanding of legalization of drug? What is your understanding of it? Do you think we are proposing that we should give it, as Congressman Rangel said, let the government distribute it when they don't have money to buy it? Or do you understand us to say we are talking about legalization, education, prevention, and testing? Do you understand that, or you don't?
Well, I think that I understand that you want to make it accessible to people, that they can buy it, they can get it whenever they want. There are no limits to their getting it. I think that's what you mean, and you also think that prevention and treatment. Tell me, doctor, how do you think you're going to get people into treatment without the pressure from the criminal justice system?
You do not. I can tell you what is happening
You can tell
currently.
they do not go to treatment without that kind of pressure, do they?
No, they do not. The only thing which put most people in treatment today is because they're caught in a legal system or they want welfare.
Then how are you? Now let me ask you something.
The thing about it, what you are making the mistake of not understanding that each one of us have internal control, and we are violating those internal controls that we have no control.
Dr.
And we should leave it up to Charlie Rangel to control our behavior.
Okay, Dr. Clarke, now let me tell you, you've got a crack addict, okay, and he's got a real habit, and he can go to his right, and, he can go to his left and get as much crack as he wants, and he can go and from wherever, and it's going to be cheap, and he can afford it, and he can go to his right and go to treatment. What do you suppose that crack addict's going to do?
He will go to treatment. I can tell you what is happening.
He will go to treatment?
I will tell you what is happening
now. And how is he going to stay
there? He can get as much drug as he wants now. Currently, the methadone program, which the government subsidized to take care of the treatment modality of people, it's one of the biggest illegal underground activities going on in the medical industry.
Well, that methadone is a block for heroin. Also, we know about 93% of the women in methadone programs also use cocaine.
Yeah,
so
but the
it is
people
not
are
very
taking it
successful.
and selling it to get crack.
Richard Dennis.
One of the other panelists wanted to deny medical marijuana to people who had wasting diseases or glaucoma, which I find an incredible position. Would you join in that and ask people to go blind and people that have AIDS to waste and die when they don't need to?
I don't really have a strong feeling about the medical response to drugs, whether or not, if they could really prove, if it was really proven it was the only drug that could stop the nausea from chemotherapy and there was nothing else that could conceivably work, I think that I might be more susceptible to that, more open to that.
Well, good, thanks.
Ira Glasser.
Would you consider using marijuana in about the same way that we treat alcohol?
I don't understand what you mean like that.
You know how we treat alcohol.
You mean on treatment?
No. I mean how the law deals with alcohol. That we regulate it, we regulate how potent it can be, we regulate its purity,
No.
we sell it not to minors. Would
No,
you do the
no,
same
no,
with
no, no.
marijuana? And
No,
why
I
not?
think it ought to be. I think absolutely it ought to be illegal
And why is that?
because of the danger and the victims
How
of
many
it. And
people died from marijuana use last year?
Well, I don't know exactly how many people died, but
number
I know
is
there's
zero.
about 300 people a day die from alcohol, and there's.
So you want to make marijuana
studies show that
illegal,
it's
which
about
doesn't kill anybody, and
Well,
you
wait,
want to
let me
leave
answer my
alcohol
question. Let me answer your
legal,
question.
which kills
That's
hundreds
fair
of
enough.
thousands.
Let her answer.
Let me
the
answer your question. About 300 people a day die from alcohol, so that's certainly not a very good guide for success, is it? You want to triple that? I mean, we can't keep talking about alcohol and say, see, it's done in alcohol, because it's going to get lots worse. But we know from the studies, which you know, that 5 times more people are 5 times more dangerous under the influence of marijuana than alcohol.
No, but I'm asking you about dying. There has never been a documented death from overuse of marijuana.
Well,
And you want to make that illegal, but you don't want to prohibit alcohol. I don't get it.
There's been a lot of documented death for people driving under the influence of marijuana.
Come on.
People having
That's not-
accidents while people,
And
forklift
100 times more
operators
for
and people
alcohol. You're
underneath.
avoiding the question, Lois.
Mr. Buckley.
I'm just saying they're both dangerous.
Yeah, Mrs. Herrington, why do you people make such distinctions between crack and cocaine, given that cocaine becomes crack with a little baking soda and water, and it takes about 5 minutes to teach anybody how to do that? So isn't that a moot question, whether if cocaine is going to be licensed, crack would be licensed?
I think that crack is viciously dangerous, and I think you know that. And I think the addiction to the children is 10 times viciously dangerous. And also,
No,
drug addiction.
My question was, why do you distinguish between licensing cocaine, licensing crack, since anybody who can buy cocaine can make crack if he is supposed to do so?
I'm not supporting licensing cocaine, and
No.
I'm not supporting
Can
licensing
you explain
crack.
to us why it is that the overwhelming majority of the American people who buy whiskey, which they can get 200 grade whiskey, they buy 80 grade whiskey because they prefer the weaker, and more people buy beer than whiskey, and so on and so forth. Why do you automatically assume that people would gravitate toward the suicidal alternative?
Because that's what we've seen. We've seen this tremendous thing that kind of shortcuts the circuits to the brain that crack does. People do things
No,
under
but-
the
but-
influence
No, but
that
on the
they'd never
contrary,
do
no,
before.
you haven't seen it. You've seen exactly 8% addiction. There are 30 million Americans who have tried cocaine, and there are 200,000 addicts. So the answer is the
And it's
overwhelming majority
illegal.
reject it.
Okay.
And it's illegal.
Okay,
You want
boys
to
and
make it
girls.
legal?
Thank you very much. That's a rhetorical question, too. All right. Now the battle of the giants. Captain Rangel and Captain Buckley. And Mr. Buckley, you start. You have 5 minutes to question Mr. Rangel, unless you'd rather spend your 5 minutes teaching us how to turn cocaine into crack.
I've never studied the technique, but I know that I could learn it easily enough if anybody chose to instruct me in it. Mr. Rangel quotes, "Maybe I've lost sight of the real objective in the war on drugs. I figured we wanted to literally put the dealers out of business and make the USA a drug-free zone. Instead, the focus seems to be on putting a good face on things, and only just enough to create the illusion that the problem is really not as serious. Unfortunately, that's a cop-out. You agree?"
It loses a lot of meaning the way you say it.
Because, of course, you wrote those words and published them a week ago. Now, what I'm saying is here you are greeting news that ostensibly says we're making progress. You say, that's a cop-out. We're not making progress at all. So I want to hear from you whether you want a society based on, say, the Malaysian or the Singapore model, in which, and I'm not exaggerating, people get publicly flogged and they get hanged and they get their fingers chopped off. Is this what you want to do in order to accomplish your aims? If not, what is it you want to do that we're not doing already?
Let me hurriedly agree with you and those members of your panel that believe that the criminal justice system has not worked and has not been a deterrent to drug abuse in this country.
Good. That's a very important concession, and I honor you for making it.
It's not a concession. It's one that I always believed. But I still believe that it should be there, because in order to fight this war, you need all of these factors working together.
Well,
we should not allow people to be able to distribute this poison without fear that maybe they might be arrested and put in jail.
Would you describe what kind of fear you have in mind that isn't already there by, for instance, Nelson Rockefeller's suggestion of life in prison, or the 1989 code of suggested 10 years?
What I'm suggesting is that if Rich Dennis has his way and somebody wants to sell drugs to a child, that person should believe they will be arrested and go to jail for the rest of their natural life. That's what I'm talking about when I say fear.
Well, you know that I have recommended capital punishment for anybody who sells dope to a minor. I am perhaps far out on this particular subject as far as my colleagues are concerned. But I want to know what you recommend, because you sit there making laws.
What I recommend...
70% of the $11 billion that are appropriated are for enforcement.
This is what I would recommend. I would recommend that the president pick somebody like Colin Powell, as he did to negotiate this war in the Middle East, and to say that what he would like to do is to make certain that the Secretary of Education has an education program
Rangel,
for every child, that we have treatment for those people who need treatment, that we have a foreign policy where at least the Secretary of State would say it's against the interests of the United States of America to do business with people that produce and export that poison here. That's what I would like to see.
This is bombast. It might work in Congress, but it doesn't really work in front of a rational
audience. But you asked me a question.
Or you say you just get some magical guy with lots of charisma.
It's not going to be easy. It's not a problem that the government can resolve by itself.
It's not going to be easy.
It takes families. It takes churches.
Unless
it takes
you're willing
communities.
to say, let's hang the local pusher, you're not suggesting any alternative over the existing program because you don't want your lips to frame those words. They're too ugly.
I am saying that we don't have a program, Mr. Buckley, and I'm suggesting that if you can find
a program... If you arrest 800,000 people, you got something, don't you?
Well, you have law enforcement, which doesn't work, but we don't have education, we don't have treatment.
What do you want to do to the people that you convict? You want to torture them to death?
Why are you just centering on the question of conviction?
And keep on asking questions.
Why is it that when we talk about this drug problem, that you put on blinders and you find out that one of the things that is not working, which is the fact that the criminal justice system is not working, that you believe that we shouldn't be doing the other things? Why do you just say legalize?
Well, because...
Why don't you talk about education?
The idea is to explore alternatives. That's what we're here to do. We are spending some $14 billion a year and losing, according to your estimate in that same article, $60 to $80 billion a year in lost productivity, and we're not making any progress, according to you.
Exactly.
So therefore, you ought to be interested in a radical alternative, which is to take this money and this effort and teach people, even as they have been taught little by little about obesity, about cigarettes, about alcohol, and we are making a little progress there.
If we were not making progress in the Middle East because the Army was not moving forward, but the Air Force was actually doing a tremendous job, would you say eliminate the Army? If the Navy was not really doing its job because it was not their time to do the job, would you say we don't need a Navy? No. We need policemen. They've dedicated their lives to try to make it easier.
I would say we certainly ought not to have a Navy if that Navy was, by mistake, killing about 800 people per day.
Now, are you saying that...
However, yeah, there are consequences.
Would you share with me who the
there are
800 people are
consequences of
being killed by? Are you saying that our local state police are killing 800 people a day?
I'm saying that 800 people a day are being killed as a result of the territorial ambition of pushers in order to get in on that $80 billion profit.
And
that
how
you
many
fingered.
people do you think would be killed per day by having access to these dangerous drugs?
I don't know, and you don't know.
But everyone.
But incidentally, I would much rather, just while you're on that point, I would much rather a drug consumer died from it than an innocent person who was in the way of a stray bullet because of a turf battle.
Would you not consider a child that's born addicted to crack an innocent person?
I most certainly would.
Would you not consider the family that was falling apart because one of its members was addicted to crack innocent people?
If you're saying that innocent people are victimized by evil people, I say, yes, that was discovered along around the time of Adam and Eve.
I didn't say they were evil. They could be diseased people.
I'm saying, should we continue to encourage public policies which have the effect of redistributing somewhere between $80 and $110 billion a year for which people are willing to slaughter each other? Listen to the statistics here of Dr. Clarke. 85% of the people who walk into his hospital are there not because they are victims of drugs, because they are victims of a drug war.
I am
and
certain
this
that
can be
the
eliminated.
American Hospital Association, the American Medical Association would think the doctor's lost his mind. Are you saying, I mean, there is no way for anyone to believe that 85%, listen carefully, 85%, listen, 85% of the people that are entering emergency wards are victim of gunshot. That's just not so. And the doctor would tell you that. How many people go into a emergency ward as the victim of being shot by a gun a day? How many?
You're talking about gunshot wound. You're not talking about someone with a heart attack, Congressman.
That's
Rangel.
what I'm talking about.
But you are trying to skew the facts.
No, no.
Congressman
All right, there's been a total
95%.
breakdown of discipline here. I'm calling this segment off.
95%.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Buckley.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now it's time for our two psychiatrists to face off. Dr. Voth and Dr. Clarke. Put each other on the couch. And Dr. Clarke, you question Dr. Voth first.
Dr. Voth, you stated that if we legalize drugs, there would be a tremendous increase in its usage because it's free to people.
I believe that.
You believe that? Well, let me make one perfect point to you. I come from a country where things are legal. Alcohol, if you're 2 years old, you could buy it. Marijuana goes in my backyard. I do not know what it tastes like, have no interest in it.
What country is that?
Jamaica. Because of my internal control. Are you saying that the human being has no control on themselves and therefore anything which is free or cheap or available, they will use it? Is that what your statement is?
Not everybody, no. There are people that are quite solid, personality-wise, and have the capacity to say no to these substances. That's true. But our country is being flooded, I mean flooded, by people who are psychologically handicapped because of the way they grew up in broken homes, partial homes, no homes. These are the vulnerable Americans that are out there that are looking for something to elevate their mood, to calm their anxieties as they face the challenges of adulthood. And they use drugs to calm themselves. These are the vulnerable ones. And they turn to,
I don't think we
not only,
disagree on
wait a
that
minute, not only that, drugs eventually lose their effect, and so there's a stair-step phenomenon. They go on to other drugs of greater potency.
Dr. Voth,
Yeah.
you know as well as I know that homelessness, lack of education, poverty contributes just as much to these conditions for these people just as much as anything else.
They may, but that doesn't justify giving them drugs.
Would you consider that the use of drugs is a medical problem, or a drug problem is a medical problem and not a legal problem?
Well, it's both.
It's both a legal problem and a medical problem.
Of course it is.
What are we doing as medical doctors to take care of the problem?
Well, we're not doing enough. We're not living up to our social
And why is that?
We are not, as physicians, living up to our social.
And why
Let me
is that?
finish. living up to our social responsibilities and telling the general public what drugs do to people. The damages, it isn't just the people who die from marijuana. My God, it's the impaired functioning that we're talking about. You don't have to use just death as the marker of the damage of drugs. It's what drugs do to people, to their judgment, to their ability to function masterfully.
Doctor, are you telling me you prescribe Valium for patients, don't you? Oh. Don't you, doctor?
Very rarely, as a matter of fact.
Do you prescribe any mood activators to patients?
I have.
Why do you do that?
Prozac, when someone's deeply depressed and psychotherapeutic techniques don't work, I have to rely on a chemical.
Why don't we think some of these
people
might be depressed? But I sure as a world am not going to prescribe cocaine or PCP or marijuana.
By the way, let me make a point. The only reason that I would not recommend the medical use of these drugs is that people would misunderstand that, and they'd say, well, see, doctors do it, therefore it's okay. Personally, I have no heartburn at all about giving a dying cancer patient some marijuana if it makes them feel better. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But the public would misunderstand that.
Last question.
Okay.
Do you recognize or have any idea of how many doctors within our community do use drugs and function effectively because they have control on themselves?
No, I don't know that.
Don't tell us. Do you have any idea?
I don't know that, and I wouldn't go to a physician that uses drugs. Would you? Would you?
Of course I would.
You would?
I would go to a physician who uses drugs.
Keep asking questions. Now it's your turn, Dr. Voth.
You're a physician. Do you have a sense of responsibility for your patients?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
And how do you exercise that responsibility?
In many forms. A patient who comes to the emergency room right now and using drugs, I will tell them about the dangers of drugs. But I never get the opportunity to talk to that person. And the reason why? I have been a failure to that person. I'm no longer a role model because I do not make the type of money that person makes out of dealing drugs. Therefore, because of that, the opportunity which I would need, just like yourself, to encourage them to be the role model, we have lost it. We have lost it. We have failed those people. Therefore, my responsibility to carry out not only as treatment, but to enhance his ability to function has been lost because of the illicit drug trade.
I don't follow that argument at all. I think it's spurious, totally so.
It is not spurious, Dr. Voth.
Let me ask you this question. When you have an impaired patient, do you not try to fix that to improve their functioning?
I do.
You do?
Yes.
All right. Do drugs taken out on the street impair people?
Yes.
Then why do you want to liberalize the constraints, let me ask my question. Why do you then want to remove the constraints against these substances that so severely damage patients? I haven't had an opportunity tonight to run through the list of all of the damages that drugs do.
And
it's enormous.
You're not going to get one
I
either.
know that. I understand that.
Right now.
Well, why do you then take a position that opens the door, carte blanche?
Yes, because
why do you do that?
The reason why I take that position is because by legalizing drugs, it gives me and yourself an opportunity to be able to treat those patients. Right now, it does not give us the legality, does not give us the opportunity to treat those patients.
You mean
those
we can't
people
treat
are
drug-addicted
dead. Those
patients?
people are dead before they reach to us.
Oh,
they are in the emergency room or in the morgue.
The treatment centers are full of drug-addicted patients. We have all kinds of opportunity to treat patients.
No, you do not have the opportunity to treat talking about.
I do. I treat them. I ran a hospital for 10 years.
How often have you seen a drug overdose, Dr. Voth?
I'm not just talking about
Dr. Voth, I'm asking, how often have you seen a drug overdose?
Lots of times. I ran a big hospital.
Is the overdose volume the same as it was 5 years ago?
I think it's increased.
No, I have seen the opposite, Dr. Voth. I have not seen an overdose in the emergency room in the past 6 years unless it's iatrogenic, something which we doctor prescribe. What I've seen daily is an overdose of gunshot wound.
Why do you want to be a physician? I don't understand it. Why do you want to be a physician?
I want to be a physician because I know I can make a difference, and that's why I'm sitting on this panel.
Well, you're going to make a
legalize drugs and make that difference.
If you convince the lawmakers to liberalize and legalize the use of drugs, you're going to make a tremendous difference. You're going to go contrary to your calling.
Absolutely not, Doctor.
Oh, well.
I told you before, we are the biggest dealers in the drug business. It's an organization just with the president, which is a drug pharmaceutical company. We are just a low-level drug dealer.
You talk out of two sides of your mouth. On the one hand, wait a minute, you don't want doctors to prescribe drugs, and on the other hand, you want to liberalize their use.
Doctor, I want doctors to do what they're supposed to do, take care of patients.
By liberalizing the use of drugs?
Yes, doctor, because we will be bringing them
create a lot
into
of
the fold to
patients for
deal
you
with
to
the
take
issue.
care of. It will create an enormous number
I
of
disagree.
patients, and there aren't
I
doctors
disagree.
enough to take care of
You cannot
them.
prove that facts. I have facts here.
Of course we can. China liberalized the use of opium. They had 25 million opium addicts. It took them 50 years to stop that
And also
plague.
China is a communist country which controls the behavior of everyone in the United States is a democratic country.
Thank you very much, doctors both.
Thank you.
It's time for final arguments, and I call upon Congressman Charles Rangel to close the case for the opposition.
Let me thank Bill Buckley for the comedy relief that he brings to this serious question. I'm certain that the only reason he would bring this issue before us in the way that he has is not to win the point, but to have Americans to focus on this very, very serious domestic problem that we have. Certainly, if we're going to become a competitive nation once again, we're going to have to deal with it. There's no silver bullet. The answer is not in the United States government or with local and state politicians. It's not just in our homes and in our churches. But it means that we all have to come together and recognize that we're going to have to save this generation and save our youth. Merely because we find so many of our hopeless and our jobless being thrown in jail, and that we know that is wrong, doesn't mean that we should just curse the doctors and give up. We didn't become the great nation that we have just because we've had difficult problems and difficult challenges. What we're going to have to say is that we're going to stick with this fight until we turn it around, until we can have a drug-free community, a drug-free workplace, and we can regain the leadership that we rightfully deserve. The answer is not in doctors' offices, it's not in the pews of churches, it's not in our jail cells. But we have to know one thing, that as long as people find themselves not in schools, without jobs, without training, without hope, yes, they'll look for something to ease the pain. Some unscrupulous doctors will give them legal drugs. To say that we should just open it up so that everyone that feels pain should not have hope and should be discouraged and think that they should depend on dope rather than trying to get their lives together would just be to give up on these people, on these communities, and on this country. So I thank the panel, not because you came here to win, but because you came here to challenge people and to have them to think, what would this world be like if every time we saw that there was a problem and every time we saw it wasn't working the way that we would want it to work, we would just say, let's legalize it and move on to something else. You wouldn't want it for your kids. I don't want it for my children and my grandchildren. But I'm confident that no matter which side of the question you debate today, that you will know that we have a lot of work to do, and I certainly hope that the President provides the leadership for all of us to support him in the next big war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Mr. Buckley.
Mr. Chairman, there are 30 million people who took illegal drugs last year, and about less than 40,000 of them were put in jail. Now, with that ratio, I think it's fair to say that for all intents and purposes, they are legal. Anybody who wants drugs can get them. They run a certain risk, but the risk that we are trying to identify is a risk that causes mayhem and makes it impossible for people in the United States to walk across a park safely at night because they're going to run into the people who are the vigilantes of that particular war. We are indeed facing, as Mr. Rangel suggests, a problem. There is a psychological problem in America. It's partly psychological, partly, as Dr. Millman says, biological, and it interrelates with pharmacology. Mr. James Ostrowski, Professor Ostrowski, recently plucked out the following: the desire for crack runs wild and takes madness into its service. Any opinions or desires with a decent reputation, and any feeling of shame still left are killed or thrown out until all discipline is swept away and madness usurps its place. When crack has absolute control of a man's mind, life is a round of orgies and sex, so that whatever income he has will soon be expended. Next, of course, he'll start borrowing and drawing upon his capital. When he comes to the end of his father's and mother's resources, he'll start by burgling a house and holding someone up at night, or go to clean out a church. Meanwhile, the older beliefs about honor and dishonor, which he was brought up to accept as right, will be overcome by others once held in restraint. Those words were written by Plato, and the word crack was stuck in for passion. So the phenomenon that we are accosted with is a phenomenon that has beset civilization ever since it escaped from paradise. We're not suggesting that we have a cure for the problem, far from it. What we are insisting on is that we have laid out the documentation that shows that millions of Americans are terrorized every single day in pursuit of a program which, by Mr. Rangel's own definition, is getting us nowhere. We should, under the circumstances, mobilize our resources to denounce the use of drugs, to expose the dangers inherent in the use of drugs, but to liberate our society from those incidental damage that a misbegotten program has bequeathed us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Thank you to all our panelists. The title of this resolution was Resolve Drug Prohibition Has Failed, and oddly, if I may make a comment or two, both sides seem to agree. The affirmative says it has failed, therefore let's repeal it. The negative says it has failed, therefore let's redouble our efforts. The war has not really been fought. I guess it then therefore leaves to the moderator to introduce the possibility of moderation. Perhaps there isn't a crisis. Perhaps the crisis is not as great as we thought, and we can therefore proceed to a slightly different argument. Why are things getting better, as statistics show they are getting better? Is it the result of the war that has been fought, or is it the result of trends, social trends that were long-range and had little to do with government policy? And that's an argument we can continue later. Thanks very much to the University of South Carolina at Spartanburg. Thanks to our panelists. Good night.
Funding for this firing line special debate was provided by the John M. Olin Foundation, the Laurel Foundation, L. John Polite, Jr., the Carolina Piedmont Foundation, the University of South Carolina at Spartanburg, and the Friends of Firing Line. This program was produced by SECA, which is solely responsible for its content. For a printed bound transcript of this special debate, send $5 to Firing Line, Post Office Box 5966, Columbia, South Carolina 29250. Indicate the subject of the debate, and please allow 3 weeks for delivery.
This is PBS.